Hi, Armand Diaz here with a video astroblog, this time on the movement of the nodes, the north and south node of the moon, into the Aries Libra axis, which is happening here on the 19th of February of 2014. Now, the nodes of the moon are astronomical points. They're not planets or anything like that. They're points where the ecliptic, the path of the sun, and the orbit of the moon cross each other. It seems very abstract and not too important, but the nodes of the moon are important. They have a lot to do with our status quo, the sense of where we feel protected, that's the south node, and then where we sort of need to go, what we need to move towards to develop something new, that's the north node. Now, the nodal axis will affect us as individuals, particularly if you're an Aries or a Libra or one of the other cardinal signs, Capricorn and Cancer. But it'll affect us collectively quite a bit. And the nodes have a very subtle effect, although I don't think that they're going to be all that subtle this time around. Let's talk about this a little bit. The south node is where we have a kind of defensiveness. It's what's worked before in the past and which will continue to work, but it's not exactly growth-oriented, and it doesn't work as well as it used to. It's a plan that used to be the best thing to do, and now is not the best thing to do. And that just makes us want to try harder. And when trying harder doesn't work, you finally get the point that if you try just a little harder, it may work. And so the idea with the south node is it pulls us back into our regular patterns of behavior, but it brings them to an extreme. Ultimately, the message is, that's an okay tool to have in the box, but you can't fix everything with a hammer, so we've got to move on and do something a little bit different. And that's the north node. The north node is the thing that you look at and say, oh yeah, this would be great, but oh, how are we going to do that? That's going to be tough. Individually, of course, we have issues with getting this done, but individually we can rise up. Individually there's always hope that you or I will say, all right, enough is enough. It's my life, I got to figure out what to do. I can move from the south node patterns of habitual functioning up towards the north node. It's going to be scary, it's going to be challenging, but I can do it. Collectively, we get that groupthink effect. Collectively, we get the effect where we say to ourselves, hey, we all know what's what, and it pulls us more towards the south node. So the north node is an important part of our collective, but the south node is where we tend to congregate. It's one of those things, it's sort of seeking the lowest level, a least common denominator type of situation. And that, that's a little problematic. Now, understanding the nodes on the Aries-Libra axis requires that we back up a little bit and see the nodes on the Scorpio-Taurus axis, where they've been for the last 18 months. It's a little bit complicated or a little bit complex because, after all, Saturn was in Scorpio and Saturn was in mutual reception to Pluto, the ruler of Scorpio, and so it's not like we're seeing the nodes apart from the influence of the Grand Cross, just as with Uranus in Aries, we're going to be seeing the Grand Cross and the South Node working together. So these things cannot be teased apart easily. But the North Node in Scorpio is calling us to say, who has the control, who has the power? And is that good? Is that the way we want things to be? We want it to get to the core of the matter. We want to dig down and find out what the truth is. And there's been a lot of stuff that's come up, from government spying on the one hand to revelations about the imbalance of wealth in the Western world, particularly in the United States, and about how corporations have been running themselves, and about things like our security for our credit cards and things like that. That's all North Node in Scorpio, pulling us towards inquiry, pulling us towards a deeper understanding, and hopefully some kind of resolution. But while this was happening, the South Node was in Taurus, and the South Node in Taurus pulls out the more materialistic, more security-oriented aspects of that sign, the more fixed energy of Taurus, and says, well, let's just sort of keep the status quo. If we don't know what's better, and we never know really for sure what's better in the future, let's just stick to the system that we have. It's great to talk about the corporate greed and excesses of capitalism and so on, but if you have your retirement account with these corporations, or if you're working for them, before you throw them overboard, you might want to know what's going to come up in their place. And so there's a conservatism that was certainly fueled by the reception of Saturn and Pluto, there's definitely a move towards maintaining the status quo, unless things are at such an extreme that you can't maintain them, or you don't want to maintain them because they really have gotten to such a point. And we see that in places like South America and Asia. But we see it in a lot of the world, but we haven't seen it so far in the Western world. Now, the movement of the nodal axis into Aries Libra gives a very different kind of energy, but it is going to take those same questions and sort of ramp them up a bit. The North Node in Libra is saying, let's reduce the tensions in an even kind of way. Let's take down the pressure. Rather than having an explosion or an implosion, what we can do is to, Nutmeg is here to help, what we can do is to reduce the pressure one step at a time, take it down over here, take it down over here, work out things so that it becomes sort of fair and equitable. But the South Node in Aries says, no, I'm worried about me. And that's going to be a problem. Rogue individuals, already a big problem with Uranus and Aries, rogue individuals are probably going to be part of this for the next 18 months at least, especially as things get very hot in April of 2014, because they are saying, hey, I can't take the pressure. And if you can't take the pressure, the weaker links are going to bust. And that's a problem. It's also a problem for rogue groups that are just saying, hey, we got to have our way. We feel disenfranchised. We're gonna go ahead and push this issue. We, happily in the United States and Europe are not seeing too much of that just yet, but it is certainly, unfortunately, a possibility. Certainly, we are seeing in the U.S. a lot of rogue individuals who are sort of busting under the pressure. Each society and each individual within the society is going to be handling things differently, so we can't look across the board. But the basic idea is there, and the basic idea will manifest, whether it is in physical violence or whether it is in other ways. You will see the same thing going on different levels. Now, it's certainly going to stoke up the Uranus-Pluto square, the Grand Cross now. Happily, Mars, the ruler of Aries, is in Libra, and that really does somehow pull us more towards the North Node than we might otherwise be, but it's certainly going to indicate some tension. We are seeing things, for example, like the debates in states and also on a national level in the United States about minimum wage laws. That's a perfect example of, let's see if we can bring about some equality to the situation. The more or less softening of the hardline approach against the Affordable Care Act in the United States is another example. It's not all U.S.-centric. I'm just picking up from the news what I saw today and so on. But it's all about, can we balance things? Can we maintain the balance, or are we going to push to extremes? The Libra North Node says, don't go so far to the extreme. The Aries South Node says, hey, look, I'm doing my thing. We're going to see survivalists. We're going to see people who's, building the bunker in the basement or whatever it is there to try to protect themselves and theirs, although pretty much just themselves. It's that type of mentality that the South Node in Aries is going to be really encouraging. And we each have to recognize that there is that sort of basic ego protection, that basic even biological protection of, I'm doing what's best for me. And it's not necessarily the best way to handle things collectively, and it's not necessarily the best way to handle things in our individual relationships, in our individual lives. It might be better to be a little bit more towards that Libra North Node, helped out by Mars up there, saying creative selfishness. Yeah, I have to do my thing. I've got to be me, because if otherwise I'm not good for anybody else. If you're not good for yourself first, you're not going to really be able to help anybody else. You're not going to be able to do for anybody else. But I don't need to elbow people out of the way. I don't need to trample them. I don't need to not take their feelings and their experiences into consideration. So that's our mission. Be yourself, but don't be yourself such that you're, kind of a jerk about it. And collectively, try not to lean onto the extremes. It can be very satisfying. Oh, it can be very satisfying, and it's going to feel more and more satisfying to go to the extreme. But at the end of the day, it may not be the best thing. Give it a shot. Let's see what happens.